Hey everyone, welcome to the ATDev Podcast. So happy to be joined today by Todd Roberts and Bryce Johnson, a true legend in the accessibility space. Hey Bryce, how's it going today?
Good, good. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And so for people who might not be familiar with your work, would you mind just introducing yourself and talking a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm a designer and researcher in the Windows and Devices org here at Microsoft. I am one of the co-founders of our Microsoft Inclusive Tech Lab, which is a space on the Microsoft campus where we bring in the disabled community to help us co-create our products. One of those products that people might be familiar with, I'm one of the inventors of the Xbox Adaptive Controller.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. And I've been using the Xbox Adaptive Controller ever since it came out. And yeah, Todd actually has some interesting experience developing adaptive gaming as well. Do you want to talk about that, Todd?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's good to see you again, Bryce. But when I was an undergraduate researcher, this was just before the Xbox Adaptive Controller had come out or had really hit mainstream. We were part of a student group called Enabling Engineering, and we were making a head array of switches for a local high school student who had cerebral palsy to try to play Madden. And so
Nice.
we had created this. I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'd done the mechanical parts of creating this array of switches around their head, and then I had done this horrible job of trying to solder directly to an Xbox controller each lead coming off the switches. And he was able to throw a touchdown pass a couple times, but it was a nightmare. And the wire was always coming off. And I think a year after I did that first prototype, your product came out, and we were like, "Holy cow, this is amazing! This is exactly where we needed to be."
And we were inspired by all the organizations that we worked with and all the people like you who were cracking open controllers and trying to solder wires to them. How do we build something that can use standard switches, which are pretty prevalent in the limited mobility world? Yeah, that was the whole genesis of it.
Yeah,
Nice.
and I really think that the Xbox Adaptive Controller, when we're explaining to people what assistive technology looks like, is really one of the first examples that we talk about as a product that was really rethought from the ground up and designed with accessibility in mind. And so I'm real curious, what led you to accessibility and really focusing on adaptive gaming?
Yeah, I don't really have a typical origin story that a lot of people have. Like, I have no cousins with a severe disability or anything like that. I grew up in web development. A lot of people in accessibility grew up in web development. Making things accessible for as many people when you're building a website just seems to make sense. Like, why wouldn't you do that? So
Yeah.
it always just seemed really obvious. When I joined Xbox, I was very keen and there was definitely a point in my career where I was like, we all do a lot of things and we all have a lot of interests, but there was a point in my career where I decided that I was going to focus on accessibility in my free time, like in my sort of side project stuff. I was still
Yeah.
working at Xbox. And so I would do accessibility stuff in Xbox. Like, I would basically try to promote it within the organization. And this was a time when there was no corporate accessibility in gaming, right? Like, it was a rough time. It was around 2012. So we were working on accessibility for the upcoming console, the Xbox One at the time.
Hmm.
And we were thinking about it. We were trying to figure out how that worked. And the video game industry lobbied the FCC for an extension to this 21st Century Telecommunication and Video Accessibility Act, which would eventually apply to consoles and gaming. And the video game industry got that extension. So we didn't have to comply with that law in 2013 when it came into effect. We had to comply with it when the waiver ended in 2015. We went our separate ways. We worked on different things. Around 2014, we got back together to talk about, okay, now we got to tackle this for consoles. That's when we put narrator on the console. We put a screen reader. We put magnifier. We enhanced our closed captioning on console. We did controller remapping, all those basic kind of well understood assistive technologies from operating systems and then applying them to the console. And
Hmm.
at the time, This was in 2015 was also when we started to work on the adaptive controller, because we recognized that the largest kind of barrier that we would see out in the world to people playing video games was our beloved Xbox controller, right? Like it's been optimized over so many generations, and all game controllers are like that. We're currently on 9th generation game controllers, and they've all been optimized so that if you have typical mobility, you can get the most out of them. And we had to recognize that over optimization was unintentionally excluding people. So that was the genesis of the adaptive controller. We did a couple hackathons starting in 2015. We worked with Able Gamers and Special Effect and Craig Hospital and the Cerebral Palsy Foundation. And we worked with, who am I missing? Warfighter Engaged, who was actually our first sort of partner. And we plugged along with it as a team. In 2018, we launched it. The business was unsure about what this was, because it still was a time when gaming accessibility wasn't really front of mind. And we had a lot of good feedback. And we've gone on to continue that. It's been great watching the gaming industry embrace creating accessible content and thinking about new input modalities and all the fun stuff that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think, from an end user perspective, gaming is such an opportunity for people with disabilities to participate and play in a virtual accessible environment. And then you realize that actually there are still a lot of accessible barriers to participation. The Xbox adaptive controller is just really a symbol of, I think, what adaptive technology can look like when done well. And I think there's definitely a design philosophy behind the controller. And I think from my personal takeaways, modularity and openness and being able to, really be a platform technology that other people can build upon and customize to their own needs. Because when you're dealing with every extremity of the bell curve, people have different needs, and you can't build one solution that, is suitable for everyone. That's my personal analysis of the design philosophy, but I would love to hear it from your perspective.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think just to give you a little bit more insight, there's the push and pull between a product team of engineers who want to help, who engineers like makers. So when we do our inclusive design work, sometimes I have to push the engineers, hey, stop talking to the makers, stop talking to the therapists, and talk to the people with disabilities, because engineers naturally gravitate towards kind of other people. So there are lots of things in the adaptive controller that were optimized for engineers. Some of them are hidden. And the balance was trying to create a traditional product. So for one example, the X1 and X2 ports can take a 10K potentiometer that you can wire up and plug in there so that you don't have to do a USB joystick. So we do USB joysticks so that people can go buy them and plug them in and they just work.
Right.
But they come to us and they go, I don't really want to deal with USB. Can I just hardwire a 10K potentiometer in there? And so we did that. And so that's the kind of balance that I'm talking about, right? Like this idea of scale. And at the time too, with the makers, I'm Able Gamers, Special Effect, Warfighter, they were all creating kits for people. They were creating setups for people. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to optimize their workflow, which was super important. But we were also thinking beyond it, right? Like we were thinking beyond the fact that someone's going to go home. Like someone should be able to buy this thing and not need a specialist to help set it up, right? Or to even get started. So the one really odd design decision is the fact that if you look on the back of the device, there's 19 ports, one for every feature of the controller, and then 2 wildcard ones, the X1s and X2s. And as we talked to all the makers and experts and therapists, they were like, no one's going to use 19 ports. You don't need 19 ports. But the reason why we have 19 ports is because if someone who isn't into software configuration and isn't into assistive technology settings. Let's say you're just playing a game and someone walks by and you're like, hey, can you make my A button into my X button? Unplug it from A, plug it into X. done.
It's beautiful. I remember we got one to mess with after that first project, and again, as a mechanical engineer, just unplugging and plugging was the most beautiful way to solve that problem. And the end user of the product could just point and say, "This is what I want." There's no, okay, how do we translate that into the design? How do we go back and forth on the software side? Yeah, it's incredible.
And software configuration is important. Don't get me wrong.
Yes.
Like, it has all the software configuration of the Xbox Elite controller. But yeah, no, that approachability and that just because that way to configure is so important, because in our research, we would go out into the world, we would see people, and I'll give an example, and I'm not trying to call out anybody in particular, but I saw this woman who was an occupational therapist who stopped working so she could take care of her daughter. And her daughter had a quad stick, right? And that quad stick was set in default configuration. There was nothing changed about it. So what did I learn from that interaction? So you have this professional who's really busy, who just can't, there's so much going on in her life. She's taking care of her daughter. Like, she just can't learn the quad stick interface. And it's not that the quad stick interface is impossible, right? And not to, like, Fred is my hero. That whole thing is one of those, it's an amazing product. We need it to exist in the world. But it's just that recognition that people's lives are busy. And that sometimes configuring AT, it should just be simple. And so that was what we drove for with that. I will say that only having 17 functions on an Xbox controller, 18, sorry, now Gen 9, 18 functions on an Xbox controller, is what made it easier.
Yeah. That's still an incredible number of inputs, though. And you broke it out and you put the power in the user's hands. I had a question outside of the technical design. Have you seen since releasing the product's been on the market for almost a decade, and it's a beautifully designed product made by a large corporation. Traditionally, large corporations have not been willing to spend a lot of money on accessibility. That's been growing. Do you think that at the top executives and the people running these businesses are starting to see accessibility as a real revenue driver, not just a nice to have, but something that can expand market share? Purchasing power of people with disabilities has been shown to be incredibly high, at over potentially $1 trillion. There's lots of other tailwinds like aging populations around the world, more need for accessibility. Do you think that's breaking through at the top levels and helping this grow, or not so much?
It's really hard to say. I think everything you said is absolutely true. I think it's just really hard to track it.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is you go to the CDC in the US, and the CDC says 1 in 4 American adults, sorry, I want to make sure I hit that, adults, has a disability. And I think that's true. But what does that mean? What is the barrier you face? Like, when you group it to such a big number, like, part of me wonders, so it is about that. And I think there is potential there, but I do think that the cases need to be refined a bit more. So let me give you like a specific example, and we're going to go away from gaming for kind of a minute. When I talk about things like supported employment in the US here, if you look at the data of what the potential market of that is, and you get an audience of people that are in supported employment, I like to remind people, hey, there are many. Oh, and if anyone doesn't know what supported employment is, it's for intellectually and developmentally disabled individuals. If you go to a Walmart and there's, say, someone with Down syndrome working at Walmart, that typically is like supported employment, things like that. It's really a wonderful kind of thing. There are more supported employees in the US than there are elementary school teachers.
Huh.
Right?
Wow.
And we look at elementary school teachers, we think that's important. And the thing about supported employees is that they have job coaches, right? They have job coaches and job developers, and they have other people that support their supported employment. DSPs, sorry, what does DSP stand for? Basically,
Direct support profession.
Direct support people, largest kind of employment sector in the US, right? That's how I tend to look at data like that. I find the big audacious number not that useful.
Yeah.
Right. We're trying to actually target like a market. Like, I absolutely work. My whole past 10 years of my career has been dedicated to serving the disabled community. There is no monolithic disabled community. Right. So the needs of people need to be understood. And the only way that you meet those needs is that you engage with the community. We have the Inclusive Tech Lab here. We've been trying to spend more time recently in direct engagement with the community. So what I mean by that is that I do joke it was great to meet you all at CES. CES is not typically the kind of event that I would go to. I try to spend more time in school gyms. If that makes sense.
Nice. Yeah, where the real insight is. Yeah, absolutely. See people in their natural environment.
Community outreach,
Yeah.
just organizing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very awesome. And maybe looking towards the future a little bit, I think everyone's talking about AI. There are a lot of other things happening other than AI. And I'm curious, in your day to day, I know you're not as involved in the day to day in gaming as much right now, but there's some new things that are exciting for people with disabilities. Both, I think, employment is like a really big thing. I'm glad that you spent some time talking about that because for me in my own personal journey, gaming has been a means to an end. I took a
Right.
lot of what I learned about how to make video games accessible and translated that into how to become more efficient and more effective worker and entrepreneur. And certainly AI and other things have played a role in that. But yeah, I'm curious, just looking forward, what are some exciting things that you're seeing?
I think just to talk about the journey for a second and some other themes that we've talked about already. The thing you have to realize about folks with limited mobility in video games that I think is very important is that video games give people with limited mobility an agency in their lives that they might not actually have in their
Yeah.
real life. And that is a really important insight. It's one of those things that I don't think people who don't have limited mobility really understand, like personal agency.
Yeah.
So when we dig into that community to look at how they interact with gaming and computers, and then we take that and apply it to other forms. I started in gaming. I didn't start in gaming. My public accessibility career started in gaming, but I'm at my core a human computer interaction guy, right? So
Mm.
yes, I engage in gaming, but with the thought of how do I apply this to other realms. So when you talk about employment and you talk about like those types of things, it's really like how do we take these things and apply new input methods? So when you're talking about mobility, we're really typically talking about input. When you're talking about blindness, you're talking about output. The core of human
Mm.
computer interaction is understanding input and output. So to bring it to what I'm excited about, if you know about the idea of universal design for learning, which is something that happens in schools, it's the idea that teachers should create learning materials that match the needs of their students with disabilities. And what I see AI being very powerful at when it comes to not only that, to learning, but also to work and to gaming and all this stuff is this idea that input and output can be transformed and can be tuned to fit an individual now with AI. We can change output to match someone's kind of needs. So if you have a blind person and you're showing them a chart, you can translate that chart very in a level of detail to meet their needs. And the same thing with input, right? Yes, there are things that happen in a lot of modern UIs that are convenient for people with typical output. But where we're at right now is typical input in modern UIs for people with limited mobility. But where we're at right now is that we create these like abstractions to help people with limited mobility navigate these input layers, right? What if we could change the input interface to match the abilities of someone with limited mobility? So this idea that software only has form because software engineers have limited time,
Mm.
right? If you
Yeah.
think about responsive design, And that what happened with mobile design, which is, oh, I create an interface that works on my phone and create an interface that works on my PC. That is accessibility. And people don't recognize that, right? If you have a desktop website on your phone, it's inaccessible to most people, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is accessibility responsive design. Let's take that idea, let's power it by AI and transform software interfaces to actually fit people, because we can now. Nothing has to have a fixed form, right? Now, I will caveat this, because there is one thing about what I am saying that does raise some alarm bells in my head. I do to say that all accessibility is personalization that accounts for human diversity. I believe that's true. But if everybody has an ultra personalized kind of interface that's powered by AI, what is our shared experience as a society? Because shared experiences are also important.
Yeah, we all need to be living in the same reality, and that's difficult, seemingly difficult to do these days.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a really great call out.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bryce, thank you so much for your time today, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and I learn something new every time we chat. Yeah, thank you again for your time, and thank you to all our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please subscribe and consider sharing with someone else that might find it interesting. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.
Thank you.